The sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful evening silence as Sarah Martinez stepped out of her car in the quiet suburban driveway. What happened next would test everything she thought she knew about courage, survival, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of military service. In the span of 30 seconds, a routine homecoming would transform into a life-or-death situation that would reveal the true meaning of no one left behind. Sometimes the most ordinary moments become extraordinary not because of what we expect, but because of who stands ready to answer the call when evil shows its face. This is the story of a single mother, 3 armed intruders, and the swift justice delivered by warriors who never truly leave the battlefield behind. Sarah Martinez had always been careful about her routines, but on this particular Thursday evening in October, her mind was elsewhere. The 34-year-old nurse had just finished a 12-hour shift at San Diego General Hospital, and her body ached with the familiar exhaustion that came with caring for others. Her scrubs still smelled faintly of antiseptic, and her feet throbbed in her comfortable sneakers as she pulled into the driveway of her modest 2-story home in the Claremont neighborhood. The house sat quietly in the gathering dusk, its white facade glowing softly under the street lights that had just begun to flicker on. Sarah had bought the property 3 years earlier, after her divorce was finalized, using most of her savings and a VA loan benefit she had earned through her late father's military service. It wasn't much to look at, but it was hers, and more importantly, it was home for her 8-year-old daughter Emma. As she turned off the engine of her aging Honda Civic, Sarah glanced at her phone. Emma was spending the night at her best friend's house for a sleepover, which meant Sarah had the rare luxury of a quiet evening to herself. She had been looking forward to it all day, planning to order takeout, watch something mindless on Netflix, and maybe take a long bath. These moments of solitude were precious and few, especially for a single mother who worked full-time in one of the city's busiest emergency departments. The neighborhood was typical of many in San Diego, a mix of young families, retirees, and military personnel from the nearby naval base. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, and the occasional sound of children playing in backyards created an atmosphere of suburban tranquility. Sarah had chosen this area specifically because it felt safe, a place where Emma could ride her bike without Sarah constantly worrying about her daughter's well-being. What Sarah didn't know as she sat in her car, checking her messages one final time, was that her home had been under surveillance for the past week. 3 men had been watching her routines, noting when she left for work, when she returned, and, most importantly, when she was alone. They had seen Emma leave with her friend's mother earlier that afternoon, carrying a small overnight bag decorated with unicorns, and they knew this would be their opportunity. Marcus Thompson, the leader of this makeshift criminal enterprise, had been watching from a stolen van parked 2 blocks away. At 28, he already had a lengthy criminal record that included armed robbery, assault, and drug possession. His 2 companions, Kyle Ramirez and Jerome Watson, were younger but equally desperate. All 3 men were heavily in debt to a local drug dealer who had made it clear that their time for repayment was rapidly running out. Sarah Martinez represented what they saw as an easy target. A single woman, living alone with a child, who worked regular hours and likely kept valuables in her home. They had observed her for days, noting her patterns, her apparent lack of a security system, and what they assumed was her vulnerability. They had no idea that Sarah Martinez was far from defenseless, and they certainly couldn't have known about the neighbors who lived just 3 houses down from her quiet street. As Sarah finally stepped out of her car, her keys jingling softly in her hand, she noticed that Mrs. Chin's porch light was flickering again. The elderly woman had mentioned it the week before, and Sarah made a mental note to ask her if she needed help changing the bulb. These small acts of neighborly kindness had helped build a sense of community on their street, something Sarah valued deeply after years of moving around during her childhood as a military dependent. The Martinez family had a long tradition of military service. Sarah's father had served 2 tours in Vietnam, her grandfather had fought in World War II, and her younger brother Michael was currently deployed with the Navy SEALs somewhere in the Middle East. Sarah herself had considered military service after high school, but chose nursing instead, feeling called to heal rather than fight. She often joked that she had inherited the family's courage, but directed it towards saving lives rather than taking them. Her brother Michael had been deployed for 6 months, and their communication was limited to occasional emails and rare phone calls when operational security permitted. Sarah missed their regular conversations, especially his protective presence in her life. Michael had always been the one she called when she needed someone to check a strange noise in the house, or when she simply needed the reassurance that someone strong and capable was looking out for her and Emma. As she walked toward her front door, Sarah's nursing bag slung over her shoulder, she felt a slight chill in the evening air. October in San Diego was beautiful, with temperatures in the 70s and clear skies, but something felt different tonight. She paused for a moment at her front steps, looking around the neighborhood with a vague sense of unease that she couldn't quite identify. The street appeared normal. The Rodriguez family's television flickered blue through their living room window. The sound of a dog barking in the distance mixed with the gentle hum of air conditioning units. A car drove slowly past, its headlights sweeping across her driveway before disappearing around the corner. Everything seemed exactly as it should be, yet Sarah felt a prickle of awareness at the back of her neck. Unknown to Sarah, that car contained the 3 men who had been planning this invasion for days. Marcus Thompson was driving, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as adrenaline coursed through his system. Kyle Ramirez sat in the passenger seat, repeatedly checking and rechecking the .38 revolver tucked into his waistband. In the back seat, Jerome Watson nervously fingered a knife that he had purchased at a pawn shop 3 days earlier. Their plan was simple, or so they thought. Wait for Sarah to enter her house, give her a few minutes to get comfortable, then force their way inside. They assumed that a single woman would be easily intimidated and quickly surrender whatever valuables she possessed. They had watched enough houses to know that most people kept cash, jewelry, and electronics in predictable places, and they planned to be in and out within 15 minutes. What they hadn't counted on was the close-knit nature of this particular neighborhood, or the fact that several residents were military veterans who maintained an informal network of mutual protection. They were also unaware that Sarah's next-door neighbor, retired Marine Sergeant Major Roberto Santos, had noticed their van during his evening walk with his dog and had already made a mental note of the license plate. 3 houses down from Sarah's home, Navy SEAL Team 6 Operator Chief Petty Officer David Chun and his wife Lisa were enjoying a quiet dinner when David's phone buzzed with a text message from Roberto Santos. The message was brief but concerning. Suspicious vehicle casing the neighborhood. Keeping an eye out. David glanced at his wife, who was used to these occasional communications between the military veterans on their street. David Chun had returned from deployment just 2 weeks earlier, and his senses were still finely tuned to potential threats. At 31, he had served with distinction in Afghanistan, Iraq, and several classified operations that he would never discuss with anyone outside of his unit. His training had conditioned him to notice details that others might miss, and his instincts for danger remained razor-sharp even in the peaceful environment of suburban San Diego. As Sarah finally unlocked her front door and stepped inside her home, she felt immediately better. The familiar smell of vanilla candles and the soft lighting she had left on created a welcoming atmosphere that helped wash away the stress of her long day. She dropped her keys on the small table by the entrance, hung her nursing bag on its usual hook, and kicked off her sneakers with a sigh of relief. The house felt wonderfully quiet without Emma's usual chatter and the background noise of cartoons or video games. Sarah loved her daughter deeply, but these rare moments of solitude allowed her to decompress and recharge. She walked through the living room, straightening cushions and collecting the few toys that Emma had left scattered around, creating order in her small domain. In the kitchen, Sarah opened the refrigerator and studied its contents, trying to decide between leftover lasagna and ordering something different for dinner. She settled on Chinese food from her favorite local restaurant and found their menu in the drawer where she kept takeout flyers. As she dialed the number, she didn't notice the shadow that passed by her kitchen window. Marcus Thompson had circled the block twice before parking the stolen van in an alley behind the house that backed up to Sarah's property. The 3 men moved quietly through the darkness, their path lit only by scattered streetlights and the glow from neighboring windows. They had studied the layout of Sarah's backyard during their surveillance, noting the low fence, the sliding glass door, and the large oak tree that would provide cover for their approach. Kyle Ramirez was breathing heavily, his nervous energy making it difficult for him to move silently. This was only his second armed robbery, and the first had gone badly when the homeowner had unexpectedly returned early from vacation. That incident had ended with Kyle spending 8 months in county jail, an experience that had done nothing to redirect his life toward legitimate pursuits. Jerome Watson brought up the rear, constantly looking over his shoulder for any sign that they had been observed. At 19, he was the youngest of the three and had been recruited for this job primarily because he was fast and desperate. His girlfriend was pregnant, his family had disowned him, and he owed money to dangerous people who were growing impatient with his excuses. As they approached Sarah's backyard, the men could see her moving around inside the house through the kitchen window. She appeared to be on the phone, probably ordering dinner, which Marcus took as a good sign. A person ordering food was settling in for the evening, unlikely to leave again anytime soon. They would have time to complete their business without worrying about unexpected departures or arrivals. What none of them realized was that David Chun had decided to take a walk around the neighborhood after receiving Roberto Santos's text message. His wife understood his need to patrol their area, a habit that was both professional instinct and protective care for their community. David had put on dark clothing and moved through the shadows with the silent efficiency that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. He spotted the three intruders just as they were scaling Sarah's back fence. From his position behind a neighbor's garage, David could see their weapons and immediately understood the severity of the situation. His training kicked in automatically, his mind shifting into the calm, focused state that had been drilled into him through years of dangerous operations. David's first priority was to assess the threat and protect innocent life. He could see Sarah moving around inside her house, completely unaware of the danger approaching. He quickly sent a text message to Roberto Santos with their predetermined code for immediate assistance, then began moving into position to neutralize the threat. Inside her home, Sarah had just finished placing her dinner order when she heard what sounded like footsteps on her back deck. She paused, listening carefully, wondering if perhaps a raccoon had gotten into her garbage again. The neighborhood had occasional wildlife visitors, and she had learned to distinguish between normal nighttime sounds and potential concerns. The footsteps came again, more deliberate this time, followed by the soft sound of someone trying the handle of her sliding glass door. Sarah's heart began to race as she realized that this was not a raccoon or any other animal. Someone was trying to get into her house. Her mind immediately went to Emma, and she felt a moment of profound relief that her daughter was safely away for the night. Whatever was about to happen, at least Emma was protected. Sarah's nursing training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly in crisis situations, and to prioritize the most critical needs first. She moved quietly away from the kitchen window, trying to think about her options. Her cell phone was in her hand, and she could call 911, but she knew that police response time in her neighborhood was typically 8 to 10 minutes. The person or people outside her door might not wait that long to make their move. Sarah's thoughts turned to her father's old service revolver, which she kept locked in a safe in her bedroom upstairs. She had learned to shoot during her teenage years, when her father had insisted that she know how to protect herself. The weapon was properly registered, and she had maintained her shooting skills with occasional visits to a local range, but the idea of actually using it against another human being made her stomach clench with anxiety. As she crept toward the stairs, staying low and trying to avoid the windows, Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. The intruders had apparently decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. Her sliding glass door had been shattered, and she could hear multiple sets of footsteps entering her home. Fear coursed through her body, but it was mixed with a fierce determination that surprised her with its intensity. This was her home, her sanctuary, the place where she had built a life for herself and her daughter. No one had the right to violate that safety, and she would not surrender without a fight. Unknown to Sarah, her brother Michael had taught David Chun her name during one of their brief conversations at a neighborhood barbecue 6 months earlier. Michael had mentioned his sister who lived nearby, expressing his concern about her safety while he was deployed. David had filed this information away, never expecting it to become relevant, but now he realized that he was about to defend the sister of a fellow warrior. The stakes had just become personal, and David Chun was about to demonstrate why Navy SEALs have earned their reputation as the most elite warriors in the world. The sound of breaking glass echoed through Sarah's house like a gunshot, shattering not only her sliding door, but also the illusion of safety she had carefully built around her life. As she heard the heavy footsteps of multiple intruders entering her home, every maternal instinct screamed at her to protect what was hers, even though Emma was safely away for the night. Marcus Thompson was the first through the broken door, his boots crunching on the scattered glass as he surveyed the kitchen with predatory satisfaction. The house was exactly as they had observed from their surveillance, neat and well-maintained, suggesting that Sarah Martinez was the type of person who took care of her possessions. In his twisted logic, this meant she likely had possessions worth taking. Behind him, Kyle Ramirez moved with nervous energy, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver as his eyes darted around the room. The reality of breaking into an occupied home was different from the planning stages, and his heart pounded with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. He had convinced himself that this would be quick and easy, but now that they were inside, the weight of what they were doing began to settle on his shoulders. Jerome Watson brought up the rear, gripping his knife with white knuckles as he tried to calm his breathing. The 19-year-old had never been involved in a home invasion before, and the darkness of the house combined with the knowledge that they were committing a serious felony made his stomach churn with anxiety. He kept telling himself that they just needed to get in, take what they could find, and get out without anyone getting hurt. From her position at the bottom of the staircase, Sarah could hear them moving through her kitchen, their voices low but audible as they communicated with each other. The casual nature of their conversation terrified her more than shouting would have. These men were treating her home invasion as routine business, discussing their next moves with the kind of calm efficiency that suggested experience. Sarah's mind raced through her options with the analytical precision that had served her well in medical emergencies. She could try to make it upstairs to her father's gun, but the stairs creaked, and she would likely be heard before she reached her bedroom. She could attempt to slip out the front door, but she would have to cross an open area where the intruders might see her. Her best option seemed to be calling for help and finding a place to hide until assistance arrived. With trembling fingers, Sarah dialed 911 on her cell phone, keeping the volume as low as possible. When the dispatcher answered, she whispered urgently, "This is Sarah Martinez at 1247 Maple Street. 3 armed men have broken into my house. I'm hiding inside. Please send help immediately." The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional as she confirmed the address and assured Sarah that police were being dispatched. The estimated arrival time was 7 minutes, which felt like an eternity when she could hear the intruders moving closer to her location. What Sarah didn't know was that her call for help was about to be answered much faster than the San Diego Police Department could manage. 3 houses away, David Chun had observed the entire break-in through his night vision scope and was already in motion. His years of tactical training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, and his body moved with practiced efficiency as he prepared to engage. David's first action was to send a rapid series of text messages to the informal network of military veterans who lived in the neighborhood. Within 30 seconds, Roberto Santos, former Marine Sergeant Major, was moving towards Sarah's house from the north. Jake Morrison, a retired Army Ranger who lived 2 blocks away, was approaching from the south. Tom Bradley, a former Air Force pararescueman, was positioning himself to cover potential escape routes. This wasn't a formal military operation, but these men had trained together informally, sharing their expertise and maintaining the brotherhood that had been forged during their service. They understood that the warriors' duty to protect the innocent didn't end when they hung up their uniforms, and they had prepared for situations exactly like this one. Inside Sarah's house, Marcus Thompson was growing impatient with their cautious approach. He gestured for his companions to spread out and begin searching the rooms systematically. The longer they remained in the house, the greater the risk of discovery or police arrival, and he wanted to complete their business quickly. Kyle Ramirez headed toward the living room, his revolver now drawn, and held in a two-handed grip that he had seen in movies but never properly trained. He began opening drawers and cabinets, looking for cash, jewelry, or small electronics that could be easily transported and sold. His movements were clumsy and loud, destroying the careful silence that might have given them more time to work. Jerome Watson remained in the kitchen, gathering items that caught his attention. Sarah's purse sat on the counter, and he quickly rifled through it, taking her wallet, credit cards, and the small amount of cash she carried. His hands shook as he worked, and sweat began to drip down his face despite the cool evening air flowing through the broken door. From her hiding place beneath the staircase, Sarah could hear them destroying her home, pulling out drawers, overturning furniture, and discussing their findings in voices that were becoming less cautious. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible while maintaining visual contact with her phone to track the arrival time of help. Marcus Thompson decided to check the upstairs bedrooms, where people typically kept their most valuable possessions. He began climbing the stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing through the house as he ascended towards Sarah's personal sanctuary. Each step brought him closer to the gun safe that contained her father's revolver, but also closer to discovering Sarah's hiding place. Outside the house, David Chun had completed his tactical assessment and was ready to act. He had identified 3 intruders based on their voices and movement patterns, confirmed that they were armed and dangerous, and determined that the homeowner was still inside and in immediate peril. His training dictated swift, decisive action to neutralize the threat and protect innocent life. David's approach was silent and professional, utilizing the same techniques that had allowed him to infiltrate enemy compounds in Afghanistan and Iraq. He moved through Sarah's backyard like a shadow, avoiding the areas where broken glass might betray his presence, and positioning himself to have multiple angles of attack. His first objective was to isolate the intruders and prevent them from escaping or harming Sarah. David had brought his personal sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 that he maintained in perfect condition, along with tactical equipment that he kept ready for emergencies. This wasn't the first time he had used these skills in civilian life, and it wouldn't be the last. Roberto Santos approached from the front of the house, moving with the steady confidence of a man who had faced danger in multiple combat zones. His Marine training had taught him to adapt to any situation, and he carried his own weapon along with zip ties that could be used to restrain suspects. Roberto's role would be to prevent escape and provide backup support for David's primary assault. Sarah heard Marcus Thompson reaching the top of the stairs, and panic began to override her careful planning. If he searched the house systematically, he would eventually find her hiding place, and she would be trapped with no means of escape. The realization that she might have to fight for her life with nothing more than her bare hands sent a surge of desperate courage through her body. She began to move quietly toward the kitchen, thinking that she might be able to reach a knife or find another weapon to defend herself. Her nursing training had taught her basic anatomy, and she knew where to strike to cause maximum damage if it became necessary. The thought of violence made her sick, but the alternative might be far worse. As Sarah crept through her living room, she nearly gasped aloud when she saw a figure moving silently through her broken sliding door. For a moment, she thought it was a 4th intruder, but something about the man's movement was different. He moved with military precision, his weapon held in a professional grip, and his attention focused on the threats rather than on potential theft. David Chin spotted Sarah immediately, and their eyes met across the darkened room. He raised one finger to his lips, signaling for silence, then pointed toward the front door, indicating that she should move toward safety. Sarah understood instantly that this man was here to help, not to harm, and she felt a surge of hope for the first time since the invasion began. Marcus Thompson called down from the upstairs hallway. "Kyle, check the basement. Jerome, finish up in there and start loading the van." His voice carried the confidence of a man who believed himself to be in complete control of the situation. He had no idea that he was about to face warriors whose training and experience far exceeded anything he could imagine. Kyle Ramirez headed toward the basement stairs, his revolver held awkwardly as he descended into the darkness below. He was focused on finding Sarah's hiding place, assuming that she must be cowering somewhere in the lower level of the house. His lack of tactical awareness meant that he didn't notice David Chin's presence until it was far too late. The Navy SEAL moved with lethal efficiency, closing the distance between himself and Kyle in complete silence. David's training had taught him dozens of ways to neutralize an armed opponent without using his weapon, and he selected the technique that would be quickest and quietest. Kyle Ramirez was unconscious and zip-tied before he even understood what had happened to him. Jerome Watson was stuffing Sarah's electronics into a garbage bag when he heard a soft thud from the direction of the basement. He paused, listening for Kyle's voice, but heard only silence. Something was wrong, but his inexperience and mounting panic prevented him from understanding the true nature of the threat that was systematically dismantling their operation. From upstairs, Marcus Thompson was becoming increasingly frustrated with his lack of findings. Sarah's bedroom was neat and organized, but he couldn't locate the safe or jewelry box that he had expected to find. His growing anger made him careless, and he began throwing clothes and personal items around the room with increasing violence. David Chun had positioned himself to have clear sight lines to both remaining intruders, and he was ready to end this invasion decisively. He signaled to Sarah to move toward the front door while he dealt with the immediate threats, but before she could reach safety, Marcus Thompson's voice rang out from upstairs with a tone that chilled everyone in the house. "Lady of the house," Marcus shouted, "I know you're in here somewhere. You've got 30 seconds to come out and tell me where you keep the good stuff, or my friends and I are going to start breaking things that can't be replaced." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt her protective instincts overwhelm her fear. This was her home, the place where she had raised her daughter and built their life together. These men had no right to terrorize her or destroy what she had worked so hard to create. David Chin saw the determination in Sarah's eyes and knew that she was about to make a decision that could put her in greater danger. He needed to act immediately to prevent the situation from escalating beyond his ability to control it. The time for stealth had passed, and now it was time to demonstrate why Navy SEALs are considered the apex predators of the modern battlefield. What happened next would prove that sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and that evil has a way of attracting exactly the kind of justice it deserves. The 30-second ultimatum that Marcus Thompson had shouted from upstairs hung in the air like a death sentence. But what he couldn't have known was that he had just sealed his own fate. In the darkened living room below, David Chin's expression shifted from focused alertness to cold, professional determination. The threat against Sarah Martinez had just transformed this situation from a home invasion into something much more personal. Sarah stood frozen near her front door, her heart pounding as she realized that these intruders were prepared to escalate their violence if she didn't comply with their demands. Every fiber of her being rebelled against surrendering to these criminals who had violated her sanctuary, but she also understood that her life hung in the balance of the next few moments. David Chun moved with the fluid precision that had been drilled into him through thousands of hours of training and real-world combat experience. He approached the base of the stairs with his weapon drawn, his breathing controlled, and his mind calculating angles, distances, and timing with mathematical precision. Years of fighting in some of the world's most dangerous places had prepared him for exactly this moment. Jerome Watson was still in the kitchen, growing increasingly nervous as the silence from the basement stretched on. Kyle should have called out by now, should have found the homeowner, or at least reported that the lower level was clear. The absence of communication sent alarm bells ringing in Jerome's inexperienced mind, but he lacked the tactical knowledge to understand what that silence really meant. From his position upstairs, Marcus Thompson was growing impatient with the lack of response to his ultimatum. He had expected the homeowner to reveal herself immediately, begging for mercy and offering to cooperate in exchange for her safety. The continued silence suggested either that she had found a very good hiding place or that she was preparing to resist their demands. What Marcus didn't realize was that his loud ultimatum had been heard not only by Sarah and David, but also by Roberto Santos, who had just reached the front of the house. The retired Marine Sergeant Major had been moving quietly through the neighborhood, but the shouted threat changed his approach from cautious to urgent. A direct threat against an innocent civilian demanded immediate action. Roberto positioned himself near the front door, ready to provide support or an alternative route of escape for Sarah if the situation deteriorated further. His Marine training had taught him the value of multiple angles of attack, and he knew that David would need backup if this escalated into a full engagement with three armed suspects. Inside the house, David Chun made his decision. The intruders had demonstrated clear intent to harm an innocent person. They were armed and dangerous, and they had already shown a willingness to use violence by breaking into occupied premises. His rules of engagement were clear, and his duty to protect Sarah Martinez took precedence over any other consideration. David began ascending the stairs with movements so silent that they defied the natural creaking of the old wooden steps. His footwork was precise, placing his weight on the edges of each step where the construction was strongest and least likely to make noise. Every sense was heightened, every muscle ready to respond to threat or opportunity. Sarah watched this dangerous dance unfold before her eyes, amazed by the contrast between David's professional competence and the clumsy desperation of her attackers. She began to understand that she was witnessing something extraordinary, the intervention of a warrior whose skills had been forged in places and situations that she could barely imagine. Marcus Thompson grew tired of waiting for a response to his ultimatum and decided to take more direct action. He began moving through the upstairs hallway, kicking open doors and searching rooms with increasing violence. His frustration was building toward a dangerous crescendo, and Sarah could hear furniture being overturned and personal belongings being destroyed. The destruction of her possessions filled Sarah with a cold fury that surprised her with its intensity. These weren't just objects being destroyed. They were memories, mementos of her life with Emma, photographs of her family, keepsakes from her father's military service. Each crash and bang from upstairs represented another piece of her carefully constructed life being violated by these criminals. Jerome Watson finally decided to check on Kyle's progress in the basement. He called out softly, "Kyle, you find anything down there?" When he received no response, he began moving toward the basement stairs, his knife held in front of him like a talisman against the growing sense that something had gone terribly wrong with their simple plan. David Chun had reached the top of the stairs and could hear Marcus Thompson's destructive rampage coming from Sarah's bedroom. The SEAL positioned himself in the hallway, using the doorframe for cover while he assessed the tactical situation. His training had taught him to gather as much information as possible before engaging, to minimize risk to innocent parties and maximize the effectiveness of his intervention. From his concealed position, David could see Marcus Thompson rifling through Sarah's personal belongings with increasing violence. The criminal was focused on his search for valuables and completely unaware that he was being observed by one of the most dangerous men in the world. David's finger moved to his weapon's trigger guard as he prepared to end this threat decisively. At that moment, Jerome Watson reached the top of the basement stairs and discovered Kyle Ramirez unconscious and bound with zip ties. The 19-year-old's limited experience with criminal activity had not prepared him for the possibility that their victims might fight back, much less that they might face professional opposition. Panic flooded his system as he realized that they were no longer the predators in this situation. Jerome's shout of alarm echoed through the house. "Marcus! Kyle's down. Someone's in here with us." His voice cracked with fear and disbelief as the reality of their situation became clear. They were no longer dealing with a helpless victim, but with someone who possessed skills and equipment that far exceeded their own capabilities. The warning cry changed everything in an instant. Marcus Thompson spun toward the bedroom door, his own weapon appearing in his hand as he processed the implications of Jerome's discovery. David Chun adjusted his position and prepared to engage multiple targets. Sarah pressed herself against the front door, her body tensed for whatever violence was about to erupt in her home. David's voice cut through the tension with the calm authority of a man accustomed to command in life-or-death situations. "Armed intruders, you are surrounded by trained military personnel. Drop your weapons immediately and surrender peacefully, or face the consequences of your actions." The announcement sent a shock wave through both remaining criminals. Marcus Thompson had extensive experience with police procedures and criminal justice, but he had never faced military intervention in a civilian setting. His mind raced as he tried to calculate his options, all of which seemed to lead to capture or worse. Jerome Watson's nerve broke completely at the realization that they were facing military opposition. His knife clattered to the floor as his hands began to shake uncontrollably. At 19 years old, his criminal career had consisted mainly of petty theft and drug deals, nothing that had prepared him for armed confrontation with professional warriors. But Marcus Thompson was a different breed of criminal entirely. His extensive record included violent felonies, and he had already served time for assault with a deadly weapon. The prospect of another lengthy prison sentence, combined with his desperate financial situation, made him willing to fight rather than surrender. His decision in that moment would determine whether this situation ended with arrests or casualties. David Chun could see the moment when Marcus Thompson chose violence over surrender. The criminal's body language shifted from surprise to aggressive preparation, his weapon rising toward firing position. David's training kicked in automatically, muscle memory taking over from conscious thought as he responded to the imminent threat. The engagement lasted less than 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds contained a lifetime of training, preparation, and split-second decision-making. David's shot was precise and professional, designed to neutralize the threat while minimizing risk to others in the house. Marcus Thompson's criminal career ended in Sarah Martinez's upstairs hallway, a victim of his own poor choices and the swift justice that sometimes finds those who prey on the innocent. Jerome Watson surrendered immediately upon hearing the gunshot, dropping to his knees with his hands raised above his head. His young mind couldn't process the speed with which their situation had deteriorated from what seemed like an easy score to a life-or-death confrontation with professional military personnel. From downstairs, Sarah heard the brief exchange of gunfire and felt her heart stop for a moment before David Chin's voice called out, calm and reassuring. "Sarah, this is David Chun, your neighbor from down the street. The threats have been neutralized. You're safe now." The words washed over her like a benediction, releasing tension that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. She sank against the front door, her legs suddenly too weak to support her weight as the full impact of what had just happened began to register in her mind. Roberto Santos entered through the front door at that moment, his weapon drawn but pointed safely downward as he surveyed the scene. His experienced eyes took in the situation immediately, recognizing the signs of a professional military operation that had been executed with textbook precision. David Chun appeared at the top of the stairs, his weapon secured, and his demeanor shifting from combat readiness to protective concern. "Sarah, are you injured? Did they hurt you in any way?" His voice carried the genuine care of someone who understood the trauma that she had just endured.